You've had the most extraordinary career. I mean, you've worked with me, for example.
I have, yes, that was a highlight.
Yeah, an absolute highlight. So you began in television,
Yes.
and when you look at the things that Daisy went to Cambridge, sadly she went to another college, but it's, you can't rewrite the past, and it's a long time ago.
I'm making up for it now.
The creator of Grand Designs and Escape to the Country, I just have to ask you, how did you get the idea, work together with others to have the idea for Grand Designs? Because it's one of the most successful television programmes anywhere.
It was because I went to see somebody's house and they had built themselves a house with these incredible oak beams. And it was the most fabulous space. It was a bit like a sort of a Cambridge Hall. And I just thought, well, this is amazing. I hadn't realised that you could build a house that you might actually want to live in, because this was the 80s, 90s. Anyway, not that young. But, this is a time when I was a bit of a snob and thought modern houses, yuck. But I saw this house and I thought, wow, everybody wants to live in a house like this. And I thought, well, we should make a programme about, people building their own houses. And then I started to meet some of them and I realised, this is going to work, because anybody who wants to build their own house is by definition insane. And as we know, Dorothy, insane people make really good TV. And not only are they, deranged in some degree, but they are also put under the greatest stress they will ever experience. And, the greatest, the classic Grand Designs moment is when you see a couple living in a caravan at the edge of a muddy field and they want to kill each other. And that is the thing. And what it is, I mean, you know this, but what it is, it's a natural format. And that's why it's lasted so long, because it's got the thing that every, The Apprentice or all these other shows have to create artificially, but this happens naturally, because you've got some slightly mad people who have a vision. They decide to build this vision. They never have enough money. They never plan for enough time. And so halfway through the programme, they've run out of money. They're living in the caravan, in the muddy field. It's raining and they want to kill themselves. But then it all comes good, because we make sure that the people that we choose, or when I was involved in it, that we choose, do actually have enough money to finish it, because, otherwise you haven't got a show. But, not that I'm ruthless or anything, but the first series, we hadn't quite sort of figured all the logistics of this out. And I remember at the end of the first series, I was determined that we would have what we call the money shot, which is, obviously the finished house and the beautiful sofas and the relax and, the flower arrangements. And of course, none of the houses were ready. And I was like, but that can't be true. And they went, oh, I'm really sorry, but yeah. So I said, okay, well, we're just going to have to stage it. And so,
dear.
Yeah, no, it was fine, because the houses had roofs, but you can do an awful lot. Some of them didn't have the full Monty in terms of kitchen and no. And so we did a sort of Potemkin village thing. We went into all these houses. We took some furniture. We made them look really, really, really nice. The outside was finished. And then Kevin would go in and say, wow, look at this. This is amazing. All your hard work has paid off. And we'd say, yeah, don't go too far that way, Kevin, because there's no floor. And anyway, it wouldn't be allowed now, of course, and it was totally immoral, but it did capture the public imagination. And I think it was very interesting, because when this series went out, they were doing an exact same series on BBC Two. It was all good ideas happened at the same time. But what they did was the sensible thing to do, which was to have 6 houses, and you do first week, all the 6 people do the foundations. And this went on and on and on. Problem is, that's really boring, because there's just so much mud that there's only so much mud you can take. You're waiting to the end of the show, because you're waiting for the finished product. And Grand Designs, a title which everybody told me wouldn't work, but again, it's the right title. Grand Designs, you always get the finished house, whether it's quite as finished as you think or not, because things look very good on screen when they probably don't look as good
and
in real
people
life.
don't realise that the difference between a successful format and you've just spent millions of pounds on a programme nobody wants to watch it can be as simple. I mean, I know there is more.
It's about
storytelling.
It's about storytelling, Dorothy. I mean, and I suppose if there is a thread to my career, is that people want stories. They want beginning, middle, and end, and they want to be treated, I think, as adults. So I really can't bear the kind of shows where they say, well, we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna tell you what we're gonna do, and then we're gonna do it. And just to remind you what we've done, we're gonna show you what. That drives me insane. So the great thing about Grand Designs is you know what you're gonna get roughly, and you know where it's gonna begin. You know where it's gonna end. It's like a crime. It's like a crime novel. You know, someone's gonna get killed, and you're gonna find out who's done it. You know. And that's the thing with the houses and the people that want to build them houses. You know there's going to be trouble. You know is the marriage going to last, etc., etc., etc. But at the end, you're going to have the pleasure of seeing the finished thing. And it's a very pleasurable thing to see a finished house. That is, that's one of those great things. It's like having a baby, It's like, one born every minute. Shows that end with something like that, you can look forward to, are always going to work.
So you were very successful in television.
Quite successful.
Well,
a lot of flops.
It's not about huge amounts of money. You created formats for programmes that people really loved and have gone on, for years and years. So why move from that to drama? And was it the writing that came first, or the idea of I want to move into drama that came first? How did it work?
Well, it was always about the writing, really. I mean, I started my own company in 2005, and I ran it for about 10 years. And that was great, but it was incredibly exhausting in the sense of, well, this, but I mean, it's like everybody's... people always come in and saying, can I have a minute? And you think, yes, of course, but I know that's actually 30 minutes or probably more likely 4 hours, And I find it, I loved it, but I also found it quite frustrating. And while I was doing that, I wrote 2 novels which were published. And when the company, I sold the company, and when my owner ended, I thought, well, this is the time to stop. And it was a bit of a kind of leap into the dark, because I'd always had a salary before, but I thought, now is the time to try and do something different. And I'd had this idea I was writing a novel about Queen Victoria as a girl, because I think it was because I also had a daughter, still have a daughter, she's still alive, and she's actually called Lydia, and she was at that stage about 18 and this high, rather like Queen Victoria. And I just thought of, as we'd had some huge row one day, and I thought, oh my goodness, supposing she was to wake up tomorrow and find herself queen, oh my God. And then I thought that's exactly what happened to Victoria and her mother. So that seemed to me like the idea of the teenage queen was irresistible. And also, the thing I loved about Victoria is that I'd read her diaries while I was here at Cambridge. I studied history here, and I studied under David Cannadine, and he did something about Queen Victoria, media and the monarchy. And I started reading her diaries as part of that, and they were so vivid. You see all these sort of candid shots of the monarchy in, film of William and Harry and all that kind of stuff, but actually, or Spare or whatever, but actually, if you read these diaries, they are so incredibly frank, and they are the unvarnished kind of picture of this woman. I mean, they become much more circumspect as she gets older, but in her sort of 18 to 21, which is about the age when I was reading them, they're extraordinary. I mean, they really are the diaries of a teenage queen, and they're very, very funny. And, she's got this massive crush on her Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne, and she kept saying, oh, Lord, there's a wonderful exchange where she says, oh, Lord, do you think I'm getting fat? And he looks at her and he goes, yes, actually, ma'am, I think you are getting fat. And she says, what am I going to do about it? And he said, well, maybe less eating and more exercise. And this goes to the point made in the first talk. But I'm so hungry all the time. So she obviously had the gene, or she had some leptin issues. She was, so I rather fell in love with her. And she's very different at the beginning, obviously, to the sort of creature we imagine at the end of her life, where she looks like a sort of, she looks set in stone, literally. And at the beginning of her life, she loved dancing, she liked staying up late. She and Albert were constantly fighting about the fact that she wanted to stay up dancing and drinking and behaving badly, and he wanted to go to bed to produce another Air, basically. And there's this wonderful... Anyway, so I was a fan, and then when I left Silver River, the company I founded, I thought, well, I'll write a novel about her, and then I started writing it, and then somebody bought the rights, and we turned it into a TV series, into a drama. So I was extremely lucky, and it was my first foray into drama. I hadn't written a screenplay before, and I was lucky because I had people who knew what they were doing. But it was great. It was fantastic. It was like starting again, and I felt, it made me feel very young.
I think you were more than lucky. I think you were actually very talented, I have to say, and I think for International Women's Day.
Yeah. Okay, I was extremely talented, but I can tell you that there was a lot of luck in, when I say to people that my first script got commissioned instantly, that wasn't just because I'm a genius, it was also luck, But because it's taken me a very long time to get another script commissioned, which luckily has just happened. But, I think it's a testament to the fact that if you believe that if you think, oh, I'm going to do this, it was like writing a novel. My first novel was very successful, which wasn't that I was, it's not, it just, if you believe in it, you can do it. And I didn't write my first novel until I was about 45. And I think before that, I hadn't believed that I could write a novel or I could finish it. And then, one day I thought, I can do this. And I just sat down and did it. And I'm a great believer in doing things that are terrifying at the outset.
Our young listeners here should...
Yeah, don't try this at home. But, nothing too terrifying. But, do something that really challenges you. I try and do something every year that I feel really scared about, like coming to be interviewed by you, Dorothy, which is obviously, quite a scary
We haven't
moment.
committed any crimes, so not my normal interviewee.
Not yet. Not that you know of, Dorothy.
And when you first saw it, I know you wrote it, but when you saw it as a television programme, what did that feel like? Because that's your imagination on the screen. And was it your imagination on the screen, or was it some other strange thing?
It was a bit of both, and there's a sort of alchemy to it. Honestly, I haunted the set, and I was the writer that everybody was like, yes, of course you can come to set. It'd be lovely, Daisy. Well, we're starting at 5, so maybe we'll send a coffee at 12, so that I couldn't do too much damage. But it was so exciting. I would sit there when there were jokes in the script, I'd laugh at them at the back of the set.
Even though you'd written them.
Even though that's how bad I am. I'd cry at my own sad bits. It was I can't say that I was in any way dispassionate about it. I was completely involved, and it was the most fabulous time. It was fantastic, and we had a wonderful cast, and it was a great thing to do. It was sort of extraordinary, actually, and I get very, very involved with whatever project I'm doing in a sort of slightly scary way. And my family had to live with me, living, breathing, thinking Victoria. So they now don't have to curtsy when I come into the room, but. At one point I did wear a corset just to kind of get me into the mood. And
you appeared in it.
I did appear in it.
In case anybody didn't see, you should say who you played and what you did.
I played slightly minor but crucial
Oh, I
character.
thought she was crucial.
She
I thought
was
she stole
crucial.
the scenes.
Well, it started out as a non-speaking part. I was playing the mistress of the Duke of Sussex, and then as the day went on, I just kept writing myself more and more lines. So by the end of it, I had a whole scene, you know. So that's one of the perks, the very few perks of being a writer.
And you liked her when she was young.
Yeah.
As she got older, how did you feel about her?
Well, I have a lot of sympathy for Victoria, because one of the things that people always say to me is, oh yeah, Victoria, but she was such a bad mother. And I always think, yeah, so she was a queen, she had 9 children, you know, she lived her entire adult life on the throne. She had to go through everything that a woman goes through while she was queen, and you've decided she's a bad mother. You know, would anybody say that about Henry VIII? Yeah, Henry VIII, bad father. Or George III, terrible father. I mean, it's a judgment that's only applied to women, and I think that somehow it's not enough that she's the first woman to be on the throne as a monarch in her own right, who actually gives birth, you know, has children, has 9 children, and somehow she's judged not on her governing or anything else, or her statecraft, or her sense of, you know, bringing the royal family to the people, but whether she was a good mother or not. And also, how does anyone know? You know, and that makes me cross, because I think we need to judge women according to their virtues, rather than just saying, well, it doesn't matter what else she's done, she was a bad mother. And it's so easy to demonise women for their supposed lack of mothering skills, and that makes me cross.
So it would appear that Maria Callas doesn't have much in common with Queen Victoria, but actually, and we'll get on to talking about her life in a moment, but to what extent do you think she was also demonised?
Oh, completely. And I think the two are they're very different women, but they are both women who've been forced into circumstances, and they are treated, the criticism of them is gendered. You know, they are called things. So the word diva, for example. Now, diva means goddess, but in contemporary parlance, it means a woman who will only have white orchids in her dressing room and 7 different kinds of mineral water. And I think that no man is ever called a diva. I mean, Steve Jobs, who famously used to throw phones at people and worried endlessly about various knobs, nobody ever called him a diva. And I think, you know, Maria said, there's this wonderful quote I like where she says, I'm as difficult as I need to be to achieve perfection. And I think, you know, if a man says that, that's a kind of, that goes on a T-shirt. If a woman says that, she's a diva. And I think we have to fight back against that. It's like the word bossy, or, you know, I mean, there are various other gendered words, but there are words that only are used to describe women who step outside their traditional role. And the thing about Maria was that she was very ahead of her time, because, well, what made her so extraordinary is she totally knew her own worth, both artistically and financially. So when she was asked to sing at the Vienna Opera, which was where von Karajan was the conductor, she said, well, yes, I'll sing there. Yes, but I'll have to be paid the same as von Karajan. And that caused the most incredible consternation. And, I mean, she's got some great quotes. One of the things she says was, yeah, I don't really care about money so long as I'm paid more than anyone else, which I think is...
I love that.
Yeah, that's a great quote, isn't it? That should have its own T-shirt. So, you know, she's very clear about how much she's worth, and she was worth that because she was one of the most famous, she was definitely the most famous singer in the world in the mid-20th century, arguably the best, and also, you know, she was worth her weight in gold. I mean, people used to camp outside Covent Garden for weeks to get a ticket. I mean, she really had the most incredible sort of star draw. I mean, think Taylor Swift now. I mean, not quite, but in that sort of league. And now we're quite used to Beyonce and Taylor Swift sort of having all this power, but then it was really transgressive. And that's one of the reasons that drew me to her, because just in the way that for Queen Victoria to be queen after years and years and years of having kings, suddenly, the last queen anyone can remember was, no one living could remember having a queen, and suddenly having an 18-year-old on the throne, that's quite, that's a big shift. And, suddenly for Maria, this American Greek girl, to kind of step onto the stage and be, this absolute mistress of her craft, I thought was amazing. So there is a similarity there, and I'm now totally identified with Maria, so she can do no wrong in my eyes.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is our 100th, it's her centenary.
Yeah.
So were you approached by a publisher, or did you think with your TV hat on, it's because in TV we're always going, there's an anniversary coming up. How did it work?
It was a little bit of that. I mean, to be honest, I'd sort of been a fan of Callas ever since I was a little girl, because my mother loved Callas, and her voice it just got me. I mean, I keep meeting people who go, I don't like sopranos, but I do like sopranos. And she just, I don't know, I listen to her, I've always listened to Callas. She's part of my sort of playlist. And as I found out more about her life, after doing Victoria, I thought, this is a good subject for me to kind of get to grips with. And then I realised it was her 100th anniversary, and I thought, great, I'll try and do it. Of course, it doesn't matter that you start three or 4 years before, and you say to the publisher, it's the centenary, it'd be really good if it came out on the date she was born. It still never does, but it's sort of in the 100th year. So I started writing it, and it was a joy, actually. I really, really loved doing it.
So her childhood, just for those who don't know, she was born in the US and then taken back to Greece by her mother, lived there in great poverty. The war came. There's some possibility that her mother and her sister had to sell themselves to keep the family going under the Nazis. To what extent do you think she was a massively damaged person because of her awful childhood, which she sort of tried to lie about a bit? I mean, I find her accents very interesting in different interviews. Sometimes she speaks like an Italian, sometimes she speaks like a posh European, but actually she's from
Manhattan.
She's a poor Greek immigrant from there. Yeah.
Somebody once said to her, "So, Madam Callas, you speak 5 languages. What do you think?" And she said, "Well, I don't know, but I count in English," which I thought was a great quote. No, she had a sense of humour. I think her childhood was clearly, as it is for most people, the wellspring of everything that happened after that. I mean, she was not. Her mother had 2 daughters, and the elder one was blonde and slim and beautiful, and Maria was the ugly duckling, literally the ugly duckling. There was a brother in between who had died, and her mother, when she saw that she'd had a girl, just turned her face away and was not interested in Maria until she realised that Maria had this extraordinary voice. And once she realised that, it became this sort of amazing, it's an amazing thing. And she kept entering Maria for these talent competitions in America, and got very cross with her when she only came second and things like that. Second to a girl who played the glockenspiel. And and I think that, can imagine being a little girl and realising that the only time your mother is going to love you is when you sing and when you win first prize. And I think that's very hard to grow up knowing that there's literally no source of unconditional love in your life apart from when you're singing. And I think that kind of drove her, because, of course, when she did sing, she became unbelievably famous. She was, she went to opera houses all over the world. She was this megastar. But I think she was driven, and the perfectionism thing, I think, comes from that early experience that, you know, no matter how hard she tried, no matter what she did, she could never be quite good enough. And I think that is, you know, that's something that drives most performers. I think most people who put themselves out there, whether it's writing a novel or making a television program or being an entertainer, they're all driven by some demon. And in her case, it was the fact that her mother didn't really love her, her father wasn't there, her husband was basically an older man who was her manager and took care of her, but didn't love her, loved, you know, what she could bring, loved the diva, not the woman. And it's quite interesting that, you know, while she was still alive, her mother, her sister, and her ex-husband wrote books about her. You know, I mean, that's a Britney level of kind of exploitation, I think. So I think there's some weird crossover between Maria and Britney, although Maria was slightly more, you know, more together, I would say.
And normally, if I was talking about somebody of such extraordinary talent, I wouldn't hone in on issues about weight, but the weight and the image and how she created herself into. She wasn't just the most famous singer; she was an extraordinary fashion icon. Who I think she actually came up with her stylist with the Audrey Hepburn look before Audrey Hepburn, and she absolutely transformed herself from this overweight Greek girl into this fabulously glamorous, gorgeously dressed woman of who quite knows what nationality.
La Dolce Vita. Yeah. No, so I think there's always, because she's a woman, there's a lot of stuff about Callas's weight. I mean, the truth is that, you know, she was born in America. She went to Greece just before the war, really good timing, and she lives through the Greek Civil War, so she gets pretty thin, as you would, and then she goes to America, and of course, like any person coming from, you know, war-torn Europe, she gets to America and she just, you know, the leptin kicks in, and or doesn't kick in, and she's kind of cramming herself with sweets and whatever, and then she goes to Italy and eats a lot of pasta, and so she puts on quite a lot of weight. I don't think she's naturally huge, but I think her circumstances made that happen. And when she's 28, she's asked to sing in Traviata with Visconti, who is the greatest opera director of the time, at La Scala, which is the greatest opera house. And he wants to put her in these incredible sort of late 19th century costumes, which have these very, very small waists. And she wants to be convincing, because she's a very, very dedicated actress. She wants to be convincing as a consumptive, you know, someone who's dying of TB. And that's not something that had bothered many opera singers up until that point, because, you know, it was all about the music. It wasn't about the acting or dramatic realism. So, you know, there's this famous phrase that opera singers use of park and bark. So you'd have, you know, people who would come in, they were doing the same productions all over the world, and they just walked to a certain point, they put their hands on the table, they'd sing, and then they'd move to their next point. But Maria, you know, if you've ever seen her on YouTube or something, there is some footage of her, you can tell she acts every single note. And she just decided that she was going to be the consumptive heroine, and she lost 60 pounds in 6 months. And there's all kinds of conspiracy theories about did she eat a tapeworm, you know. There was this pasta brand put out a whole advertisement saying Maria lost the weight because she ate our pasta, and she sued them, and, you know, there's endless stuff about it. I mean, you can imagine, it's like, where's Kate Middleton? It was of that level of sort of conspiracy nonsense. But the truth is, she stopped eating the pasta, she stopped eating the cakes, and she started eating steak tartare pretty much at every meal, which might have given her a tapeworm, but who knows. And that's how she lost the weight.
Yeah, she didn't eat very much, but also she may have gone to Harley Street and
She might well have done.
You
I mean,
know.
there's kind of no evidence of any of that. I think she was a woman of iron discipline. So if she decided she was going to lose the weight, she would lose the weight. And, you know, she was extraordinary. If she said she was going to do something, you know, you don't become an opera singer at that level unless you've got incredible self-control.
And what do you feel about her voice? Because not everybody liked or likes her voice. There's something, maybe I'm implying me, there's something about when she's acting that you, if you're watching her, she's so magnetic, but her voice isn't a sort of perfect voice, is it?
No, it's not a perfect voice, but I think that's what makes her so gripping, because you never quite know what's going to happen. You know, she doesn't have that incredible smooth bel canto line like, you know, Kirita Kanawa or, you know, Renata Tebaldi, her great rival. But what she does have is a sort of drama and a sort of unpredictability about her voice, which is arresting. And the other thing about Callas is that once you've heard her, you know that it's Callas. I mean, you know, if you ever hear her singing again, you know that it's Callas singing. And that, I think, is, you know, a mark of her greatness. I would give anything to have seen her live. And I've even been to see the hologram of her singing, which is not really the same thing. But, I mean, I can imagine on stage, if anybody gets the chance, if you go on YouTube, you can see the second act of Tosca, which she does, and it's really extraordinary. I love her. I love her voice, but, I mean, you know, it's personal taste, you know. But there's a roughness, there's a visceral quality to it, which you don't expect in an opera singer. But that's, I think, the thing that made her so great. I mean, you know, it's the crack in the vase, isn't it, that, you know, makes the greatness. And she knew that she didn't have the most beautiful voice. And she was always saying, well, I don't care if anybody doesn't like my voice, I just do my best. But, you know, she got this incredible fame because her voice wasn't perfect, because people remembered her. And also the other thing about Maria is that she really had the voice for Wagner, but she ended up singing bel canto, which is the kind of, you know, Lucia di Lammermoor and all these very sort of tweety, trilly type operas. And she had this big kind of gutsy, you know, slightly earthy, visceral voice. So there's kind of mismatch there, which makes it really interesting.
And it's often said that it was because she wasn't really trained properly and she was made to sing too much when she was young that her voice went. And what was that like for her when she could no longer sing the way she used to sing?
I think it must have been absolutely heart-wrenching, heartbreaking, soul-destroying. I mean, you know, Andy Murray can go out and kind of lose in Australia and, you know, he's still Andy Murray, whatever. But, you know, when she sings Norma in 1959 in the Opera House in Rome, and it's a New Year's gala, and they've got all, you know, the president is there, these all VIPs are there, and she wakes up with a bad throat, and they're all like, she says, have you got an understudy? And they go, well, you know, no one can be Maria Callas's understudy. And so they say, you'll have to go on. So she does, and halfway through the second act, her voice just goes. And it's like, you know, it's like being invisible and suddenly being made visible. It's like losing your superpower. And she won't go on, and everyone's saying, oh, well, you know, you could just sort of walk around the stage and, you know, just speak your lines. She says, absolutely not, and walks off. And then, because they don't know what to do, there's a riot in the opera house, and there are people outside the opera house shouting, go back to Milan, you witch, you know, la strega. And it's impossible to imagine that, but people felt personally affronted, and they blamed her. They didn't blame her voice, or, you know, they blamed her for this kind of the fact that she'd left them in the lurch like this. And I think that's very hard when you're losing the thing that you value most in the world, and then you're told that it's your fault. That is heartbreaking. But in answer to your earlier question about losing her voice, I think it was because, you know, singers are like athletes. You probably all know this, but I mean, literally, they are like footballers or ballet dancers or anything like that. You only have so many performances. You can only go on for so long. And you can go on, into your 50s if you look after your voice really, really well. And now, if you're an opera singer, you're not allowed to sing certain roles until you're 30 or something. You can't sing the Countess in Mozart or whatever. But Maria, none of that happened with Maria. And there are all these, because she was so miraculous, she was singing, Wagner and Tweety sort of Bellini in the same week. And that was, you can't do that. That's like, running a marathon and then doing the 100 meters the next day. And I think that was the thing that ruined her voice. And none of the men that surrounded her, who loved her so much, who loved her voice so much, said to her, hang on, darling, maybe you should pace yourself. And I think that must have been a terrible realisation for her. I mean, really awful. I mean, that must be the worst thing in the world, to realise that the one thing that you think people love you for, is finite.
Now, I want to give people a chance to ask you some questions, but I have to ask you what you feel about her relationship with Onassis. And, she really loved him. Did he really love her? What do you... Because for anybody who doesn't know, she basically woke up one day and found that he had married Jackie Kennedy without telling her. I don't think he loved Jackie Kennedy, but it was, wow, you get to marry the president's wife when particularly you're a major criminal. That's, arguably some presidents have been criminals, but what do you feel briefly about that love story?
So Maria meets Onassis at the end of the 50s, and the first time she meets him, she's not that interested because her voice is still working. And then as her voice begins to go and Onassis becomes more and more pressing, I think that, there's a crack in there for to have another life. And I think if she'd met Onassis 10 years earlier, she wouldn't have looked at him. But because they met at the point when she was beginning to lose her voice, I think she allowed herself to fall in love with him. And it wasn't the money. It was the fact, obviously the money didn't hurt. Although I have to say, she always paid for her own airplane tickets, even though he owned the airline. So I think she gets top marks for that.
Oh.
Olympic Airways. And I think it was the fact that, they had so much in common because they were both expatriates. They were both Greek. They spoke Greek, which was very unusual in the kind of world they lived in, which was full of sort of, minor Italian aristocrats and movie stars and whatever. But they were not many Greeks, and they were also they were entirely self-made. They worked themselves up. They'd made their own fortunes, their own name. And again, they were surrounded by sort of hangers-on. And for that must have been a very attractive thing. That must have been a really magnetic thing between the two of them. And also, they obviously had great sex, or Maria did anyway. And I think that was a huge revelation for her. She hadn't really had that before in her life. So she was thinking, great, maybe there is life after singing. And then 9 years later, she wakes up and he says, I've got something to tell you. And he, first of all, he had an affair with Lee Radziwill, who was Jackie's younger sister. And then he started seeing Jackie, I think probably even before Jack died. And then Jack was murdered. And then, 4 years later, he marries Jackie Kennedy because Jackie Kennedy wasn't going to be his mistress. She wanted to put a ring on it, as they say. And she was a very sort of canny player of things. They were utterly miserable together. And, at the end of, after 2 weeks, Onassis tried to go back to Maria. And, if you read the book, you'll find out what happened. But I think it was heartbreaking for her, a terrible humiliation and a terrible betrayal. But, there is this idea that somehow after that, she was like Madame Butterfly and just sort of collapsed and that was the end of her life. That's not true. She made a film with Pasolini of Medea. She, she did an incredibly successful concert tour of the world. She had an affair with another tenor called Giuseppe Di Stefano, and she gave masterclasses at Juilliard. So she did not kind of wither and die. She was not, she didn't collapse into a crumpled heap. She was perfectly capable of, going on. I think she had a weak heart, possibly from slimming pills, whatever. And she did die young at 53 in 1976. But I think, it wasn't of a broken heart, let's put it that way. I think it's too easy to say that. And I think she was, I think she was a strong, independent woman who found some kind of way of dealing with the betrayal by Onassis.
And will this be a new 20-part or 10-part TV series?
Let's hope so. Then I can endow all kinds of chairs. The whole
marvelous,
thing. Yeah.
marvelous! But buy our books, please. Yeah. Oh, we've got them here. So now, any questions? Oh, yes, one here. Could we give you the microphone? Just coming to your left.
Thank you. Thank you for a very lively and interesting talk. Can you say what issues occurred to you when you were novelizing this life, making it into a fiction?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, people ask me that, and for me, I did think about writing biography, but when I started looking into the facts of Maria's life, you find that there's really, all the facts are disputed, literally everything. I mean, Dorothy will agree with me. And I just thought, no, I'm not going there. I don't speak Greek. I can't do that. But I did think that I had a pretty good take on who she was. And so what I did was I looked at everything, almost like an actress preparing for a part. I looked at everything that she'd said. I looked at every scrap of footage of her. I read everything she wrote. But I did all of this with a novelist's eye, because, of course, what people say and what they mean is not always the same thing. And so the thing about Maria is that she would make a lot of very brave declarations. Like she would say, all I want is to marry and settle down and raise children. I don't care about show business. And, of course, that was complete bollocks. She absolutely did not want to do that, And so you have to read all this stuff and you have to think out who is the woman there. And I think that, and I also took some singing lessons, so I could sort of understand what it was like to be controlled by this thing that you have no control over, which is your voice. And that was fascinating too. And so I think who knows whether I've got close to it or not, but I didn't invent any characters. I didn't invent any major incidents. Everything that happens in the book happened, but obviously all the dialogue, even the most unbelievable things happened, like they all go on this cruise, Maria and her husband, Onassis and his wife, and Winston Churchill and his wife, and they're all on this cruise, and that's where they...
You would never make that up.
No, you couldn't, and that's where they get together. So if you read that and you think, oh, come on, that is all true. And Winston Churchill had no idea who she was, too. And she kept saying, oh, Sir Winston, whatever, and he was like, oh, do you sing? Oh, lovely. Gilbert and Sullivan. So that was funny.
Any other question? Oh, well.
Oh, no, here's two questions.
Two down here. And if we take these two, and then we'd better have our little break to go over for the concert. Maybe you could sing at the end of the concert now you've revealed that.
Well, there's a threat.
Thank you for that. It was really interesting. You rather modestly said that you were very lucky in your television career. I just wondered what that luck entailed for you. How did you get lucky?
Oh, God. I shouldn't say lucky, because Dorothy's right to pull me up on it. It's a self-deprecating thing to say, and women shouldn't be self-deprecating. I was lucky because, it's all about timing, is what I mean, really. I think when I really understood, when I made my own luck, was when I realised that actually what I was really interested in was the thing that probably the world would be interested in. Not because, I could dictate my taste to the world, but the thing is that if you're part of a cohort, if you're part of a time, you know, if you find something fascinating, the chances are other people will too. And when I first started in television, all I wanted to do was make things that would impress my friends, as it were. You know, I wanted to say, oh yes, I'm making a documentary about Benjamin Britten. But when I realised that actually what I was really interested in was making things about, you know, how you can, you know, how you can put makeup on better, or how you can dress on a budget, or how you can build your own house, I suddenly thought, oh, okay, you know, there's an art to this, and it's very important not to kind of look down on the commercial, you know, but you can't just write, but the obverse is true too. So if you think, oh, well, they'll watch this, you know, people will like this shit, basically, that doesn't work either. Because if you say, oh, I'm going to write a murder mystery because everybody likes murder mysteries, it doesn't work like that either. You have to believe in whatever you're doing. And if you're in television or writing books or drama, whatever it is, you know, you've got to find something where your interests connect with the public. And with Victoria, that's what it was. I love watching a costume drama. I'm fascinated by royalty, very unfashionably. I love seeing young women at the centre stage. I want to see them in control. I want to see things where the woman is the boss, you know, and all those things came together for me. And it's the same with all the TV programmes I made, where I was really, really personally invested, you know, whether it was Grand Designs or Property Ladder, or, you know, then it would work, because, you know, people respond to the authentic, I think is the word. And I'm very interested in Maria Callas. Whether anybody else will be, I don't know. But I think the point is that you have to be sincere about what you're doing. And, you know, as Dorothy will testify, I've spent my life selling stuff. I also made The Apprentice. I made the first thing of The Apprentice. And I know how to sell, but you can't really sell something unless you really believe it. And yes, I've made some shows which I didn't believe in. There was one show I refused to make because I thought it was morally repellent, called The Swan. Do you remember The Swan?
That wasn't my idea, was it?
No. It was a format, could have been, but it was a format in the States where they took ugly ducklings, they took them away, they gave them plastic surgery.
Oh my God,
for 12 weeks.
Yeah.
And then at the end of it, they competed in a beauty pageant.
Wow.
Oh my God. And that was my proudest moment. I said, I'm really not ever going to make that, because that's when I sort of felt TV's, I can't do this anymore. But I mean, it was a really...
it wasn't mine.
No. I think even you, Dorothy, would draw the line at that, you know.
I think we have one more question.
A man?
Somebody...
No, you definitely raised your hand. You with the beard. You raised your hand.
Yeah.
You have to ask a question now, by the way.
Well, I'll ask you a question. Okay, so final question, right? His name was Daniel Korski. He was had been the special advisor to David Cameron, and you told the Times that he'd put his hand on your breast, and afterwards his plan to be the Conservative Party candidate to be London Mayor didn't come off. So just for a moment, what was that like, speaking out as a woman about something that had happened to you, and what happened briefly?
Okay, so I'd written about it before, but I hadn't named it. But basically I said I'd gone for a meeting to talk about a television programme in Downing Street with this man, Daniel Korski, who I'd met before. He sits me down in Mrs. Thatcher's drawing room. He's quite sort of flirty and weird. And at the end of the interview, he puts his hand on my breast. And I'm like, "You putting your hand on my breast?" And he went, "Oh," like this. Anyway, I was sort of amazed, bemused, sort of, yeah. So I go away, and it's a funny story. And then, you know, Me Too happens, and I think, oh God, you know, this is exactly the sort of thing, you know, we should speak out about. I should have spoken out about it. So I wrote a piece, and the funny thing was that even though I didn't name him, everybody in Downing Street knew who it was. Everybody. Okay. Then Ian Hislop rings me and he says, Daisy, do you know that Daniel Korski is running to be the Conservative candidate for the London Mayor and he's going to win? And I was like, what? And I was like, oh God. So I did have a kind of quite grim night of the whatever it is. You know, I couldn't decide what to do, and then I decided I really have no choice. This is the only ethical thing I can do is to name him, because he was going to be, you know, if he'd won, he would have been responsible for the safety of women and girls in the capital. I'm a Londoner, couldn't have that. And also, you know, there are enough sleazeballs in politics. We don't want any more. So I wrote a piece in the Times where I said exactly what happened. And it was really interesting because I was lucky because I could control the narrative because I wrote the piece myself, and I wouldn't let anybody. I didn't do any interviews. I wrote my own piece, and I think that helped because it meant that I could say exactly what I had to say. The only interview I did do with Martha Carney on Radio 4 on the Today programme, and she said, "Oh, but Daisy, I mean, this is a long time ago. Are you sure this really happened?" And I just thought, oh
Really?
my God.
Oh yes, I remember that.
And
actually.
I said, I'm quite surprised you can ask me that, Martha, because, you know, I think we do need to believe women. I mean, why on earth would I have got up at 5 o'clock in the morning to talk about a man handling me? You know, I mean, the idea that I would make this up. Luckily, because I'm quite old, this is where ageism does work, because I'm quite old and because, you know, I've got another life. People did take me at my word, and he had to resign 2 days later, and it was a bit
And
of a
other
maelstrom.
women.
Yes, and this is the real point. Thanks, Dorothy. The real point, and this is where it's so important that people should speak out, is because actually I kept, you know, as I was doing all of this, I thought, oh God, you know, am I exaggerating? You know, whatever. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he just brushed against me. And then the moment my piece was published, 5 other women contacted me to say, oh, exactly the same thing happened to me. He put his hand on my thigh, he brushed his hand down my front, he assaulted me, he did this, he did that. And I thought, oh wow, you know, this is the proof. You know, this is what happens. If you don't speak out, people don't know. So you must speak out. And it's difficult. It's not easy. And it does involve a certain amount of kind of gritting your teeth. And there's a certain amount of, don't look online. If something like this happens to you, never go online. Get somebody else to do it for you, because you will be horrified. It's like picking up a stone. In fact, I was lucky, but not lucky, but, you know.
Well, you were a woman of standing in society who couldn't just be dismissed
as somebody
in the way that younger women are. You know, their
so
reputations are traduced,
and that's
they
the reason,
speak out.
And that's the reason. So all these women who'd also had the same experience, the reason they hadn't spoken out is because most of them worked for the Foreign Office, and they didn't want their careers to be tainted by this. They didn't want to be known as the woman who spoke out against this man, you know. And I completely understand that. And I wish there was a way, and this is something that Dorothy and I are going to sort out. There was a way. Yes, there was a way. There was a way that we could advise women, you know, in this situation about what they should do, the best thing for them, and the best thing, because as we know, HR is nest of vipers and not worth going to. And actually, often in these situations, it's only the press through which you will get redress. But then, I'm afraid, you know, some journalists are wonderful, and some, you know, will.
It's a
The
risk.
first time I wrote this piece, I woke up. It was in the Radio Times, and I hadn't named the guy at that point. And this was just in 2017, after Me Too. And I woke up to find the Daily Mail on my doorstep and pictures of me on front pages looking busty. And it was like basically. I mean, even though all the headlines were very, you know, she alleged da da da, the implication seriously was, well, you wouldn't you? You know, and that is, you know, that's male picture editors for you. I mean, I was so amazed by the whole thing. So I, you know, thank you for asking me about this last.
Well, congratulations on behalf of women who've had to put up with that for
Yeah.
years from
Well,
lots of
I really
men.
hope that that your students are going into a group-free future.
Well, that's a great. So, thank you very much.